I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to be able to speak to you today. Maybe we could kick off with a brief introduction to this amazing show. What can people expect when they watch it?
Yeah, well, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart is a 7-hour, emotionally compelling series about Alice Hart. And when we first meet her, she's a 10-year-old girl, and her parents have died in a very sort of tragic and mysterious fire, and she's sort of orphaned. And just when you think there's going to be no one else to look after her, a mysterious grandmother, played by Sigourney Weaver, arrives and sort of takes her on and takes her back to an even more mysterious native flower farm. And the series is really about the secrets that are revealed from Sigourney's character, June, about why she was sort of in this isolated place with her parents. And the rest is, that's why you're watching. Yeah, it's a thriller, it's a mystery, it's a pretty emotional drama, and it's a very beautiful watch.
And of course, based on the best-selling novel, how did you first discover that book? What do you think it was that really resonated with readers? And why would it be a great story to put on the small screen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I first was sent the script. I knew of the book. I'd never read it. And what I usually try and do is read the script first and see really what the world is like on screen, like what it wants to be on screen. And then I went and read Holly's book and really fell in love with her writing and how evocative it is. And I could see that it's a pretty hard story at times. It deals with some pretty tricky subjects. But she writes with such beautiful flourishes, and it's very poetic. And I thought it was something that I could really sink my teeth into as a director. It really spoke to me, both as a script and as the source material.
And one of the things that, as I was watching it, I thought as a director might have been quite challenging is that because of all these mysteries, because of all these various plot threads and the sort of, the time span that it unfolds over, it's quite a lot to kind of manage. Was that something that was challenging? And what was your approach to kind of, making sure it unfolded in just the right pace throughout the series?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really complex, multi-layered, multi-generational as well. Like, the story is told over 20 years. And yeah, finding that balance of story and character, and, when to push things when it needed to be dramatically, and when to hold back and make it, have some moments of joy in there, was a huge part of not only working on the scripts, but definitely shooting, and most importantly in the edit. It was a really long process to find that balance. But I think what we've found is a really, when I think of Lost Flowers, I think of it as a really dense, atmospheric, almost haunted story. And it's really engaging to watch. Like, you sort of have to lean into it. If you let yourself get taken into the story, it's really easy to be enveloped by it. And I think that, yeah, finding that balance, I guess, is what you're saying, between the light and the dark. And ultimately, it is a story of hope and resilience and strength. And it was a real joy to actually find that. Like, it's really good to sort of make stories that feel honest and portray real women in these, very hard stories. And I think we're skirting around things. Like, there is a lot of stories about, the story is thematically around generational domestic abuse. And I think we've found a way not to make it palatable, but to talk about really big issues like this, but do it in a way that's really beautiful, and you are left with a feeling of hope at the end of it. Yeah.
And of course, this incredible kind of set of women that you have in your cast, right from the younger actresses, right to veterans of the screen like Sigourney Weaver. Yeah. How did you decide who was going to take on each role, and how did you work with them? And I guess, particularly when you're working with younger people with these quite challenging issues, there has to be, a feeling of trust on set, and making sure that everyone's protected and their mental health is protected in being able to play out these stories.
Yeah. Yeah, well, to the first part of your question, when, June is sort of the matriarch of this story, and there was no one else for us but Sigourney Weaver. It's who we thought about. And, when you come up, when you're working on scripts like this, you go, who would you wish you were looking at when you're reading these scripts? And Sigourney was always there. And we sent her the book and the first script, the first episode, and she loved it. And she engaged really strongly from the very beginning. And I could tell that she was on board emotionally. I think she could feel what would be the potential of a very complex character like June. She is kind of like, in a way, it's an actor's dream, that role. It's morally ambiguous, multi-layered. She holds a lot of secrets, and there's a lot of drama, just innate drama in her as a character when you see her on screen. And Sigourney was incredible to work with. I learnt so much from her, and I think, well, hopefully she learnt some things from me as well. But we got on. I think we got on as friends as much as we did as collaborators on set. And yeah, working, like there is some very tricky material in The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. There's a lot of violence, and I guess, like, for me, from a directorial point of view, I didn't want to look at that violence, and I definitely didn't want to create images that felt like it was just adding to more violence against women. We found different ways to explore it. It feels very first person. It feels, I guess, experiential from that point of view. And around Lila Brown, who plays the young Alice, who's just an incredible young actor that we've discovered. She was a really emotionally intelligent young woman. And we spoke very early on about the content and about ways that we would be able to, when you see it, it would feel very, you really feel like you're living it. It's quite threatening. And yet she wouldn't really be part of it on the day. So there's obviously different editing techniques and stuff that you can use to get her around that. But it wasn't like we're ever shielding it from her. Definitely, it was a very safe environment for everyone. But she was also a young actor who, she kind of understood the story. Like, we were protecting her for, about the things that she needed to be protected from, but it wasn't like we needed to hide what the story was about. She was very open to that, and, was surprisingly engaged with the material. Yeah.
And it also feels like the setting is very crucial to the story. And, this kind of the Australian backdrop, and even the locations, just thinking of that isolated house, and of course with the flowers and the gardens and things like this. So, how important were the locations, and how does that kind of feed into the story?
Yeah. Well, in Holly's book and on the script, they were there, those locations. So we had to go and find them. And I was actually surprised. I mean, we spent a long time scouting and looking for these locations, and they're not places that present very easily. I'm thinking about, their Alice's house at in episode 1, that very isolated house in amongst the sugarcane. They're not places that you can just go driving and find. You've really got to embed yourself in a community and start asking questions and kind of get led to them by other people. And I remember in particular being taken to that house location for the first time, and you go in, you're literally driving through 3-meter high sugarcane, and it just revealed itself through the cane. And it felt like I was in a film watching that, like just through the windscreen of the car. And I just knew that was the right place. And it was a long way away from anything. But it was charged, that place. It had a very, I don't know, I keep talking about this, but a very haunted energy, which I think helped permeate through the rest of the series. And a lot of the places that we shot in Australia haven't really been on screen before. Like, we're in unusual, very unique locations, places I had never traveled to, and definitely film crews hadn't really spent much time shooting there. So I feel it feels good to have brought a different parts of Australia to the screen, and for them to be so heavily featured feels like a nice thing to have done. Yeah.
And as we were mentioning earlier, about the kind of the themes and the issues that it does tackle. I mean, they are weighty issues, but also, as you said, there is hope there. So was that really an important balance to sort of strike? And I guess kind of exploring this idea of what might have happened to us in our past, can we escape that? Are those things that stay with us? Do we get trapped in a cycle of trauma or intergenerational trauma? How do you break out of that? I mean, so even if people haven't experienced the exact things that they're watching in the series, there are some universal aspects there that people can perhaps connect to and consider.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a really great question, and it's one of the great themes, one of the bigger themes of Lost Flowers. When I first read that first script, and as we got into the material, it really resonated with me. It felt familiar in lots of ways, and I know from personal experience that it is possible to break these cycles, and Holly speaks about this very well. But like, if you ask for help, it's there. You will be listened to, and it's important that we do listen to people that are in these situations and we do help them. And I think over the 7 hours of Lost Flowers, you see and feel how those cycles can be changed and broken, most importantly. So, it is a story about, as if saying, like, generational abuse, but it's also about resilience and about the hope on the other side of that when it is broken.
And, it does still feel quite refreshing to see such, strong female-led cast, right throughout the series, and for series, shows to be tackling these sorts of issues. So even though we're kind of, I think, all much more aware of how much of a problem, violence and abuse is against women, it's not something that we still talk about that much, or maybe there's still some taboos around that. So do you feel that shows like this are kind of breaking new ground in that sense, and finding different ways to tell these stories for people to understand the issues better? And hopefully it's something we'll see more of in future.
Yeah, let's hope. I mean, even if it's just, we're talking about it now. If it starts conversation, that's great. I did a series for the UK, for BBC, a few years ago, called The Cry, which, was ultimately a story about coercive control. And when I was working in Scotland at that time, it had just become law, or there was a law about coercive control, and you could be charged with coercive control. Where in a lot of places, that's still not the case. It's definitely not that not that in Australia. So I feel like the more these things are talked about, and more openly that they're, there to be seen and watched and discussed and considered, it's not something that's behind closed doors. I think things like domestic violence are often sort of like, like if violence happens in the street, something is most often done about it. But when it's in someone's home, it's not, because it's sort of seen as, well, it's family. It's something that's, it's private. And that shouldn't be the case. There's no exception ever for any kind of violence. So for me, this series, and the fact that it's getting out there, and hopefully a lot of people see it, will broaden that conversation and help it to be, I don't know, not something that's just talked about behind closed doors. Yeah.
And do you feel like also having like all these different streaming platforms, it does feel like it actually opens up more space for different types of stories in different settings? Whereas, in the past, we were relying more on, things coming out of Hollywood, it was harder to shine a light on these sorts of things. So do you think that is opening up more space?
Yeah. I mean, there's with the way that we consume things these days, it's really different from a few years ago or 10 years ago. And yeah, I don't think you would have seen a series like Lost Flowers of Alice Hart on traditional television, 10 years ago. I think one of the great things about streaming is that we need to be finding stories that are unique and really different, and hopefully they find a big audience on a streamer like Amazon. I'm really excited. I'm excited that this story is, it's an Australian story, but it's, tomorrow on Friday, it's going out to 240 different countries. That's a huge thing. And, it was Amazon who really believed in the project from the beginning and supported us to make it how we wanted to make it, warts and all. So I hope it finds an audience, and I hope people sort of resonate with the honesty in which we made it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me, and can't wait for everyone else to have a chance to series when it lands this week. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.